Going over the answers to the probability test, Unit 2 test for Math 2. For number 1, you are rolling a 6-sided die and you have to find probability. Your outcomes are that you can roll a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. Those are your 6 possible outcomes. The probability of rolling a 2, remember probability is always a ratio, so all of your answers for every probability, I'm sorry, I'm going to take your phone, sir. Put it in my hand. Right now. I'm not playing. And I'm going to keep that in the video. All of your answers for probability problems are fractions, so please make sure you have a numerator and a denominator to every answer. Out of your 6 possible outcomes, one of them is a 2. So the probability of rolling a 2 is 1 out of 6. For B, you are asked, what is the probability of rolling an odd number? Out of your 6 possible outcomes, your odd numbers are 1, 3, and 5. So there are 3 odd numbers out of 6. For C, you are asked the probability that a number that you roll is both 3 and even at the same time. So you need to ask yourself, can a number be 3 and even at the same time? It cannot, because 3 is an odd number. So therefore, the probability of that event occurring is 0. Next, you are asked, what is the probability of rolling anything but a 5? So that means I could roll a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 6. That leaves us with 5 outcomes that are anything but a 5. So 5 out of 6 is your probability. For number 2, it says Briley flipped a coin 6 times and got the following results. Tails, heads, heads, tails, tails, tails. So she conducted an experiment. If you look at the questions, they ask you to basically differentiate between theoretical probability and experimental probability. You may remember in class that we put on the board, we went to a website and we did a simulation of flipping a coin. We should know that in theory, because there are 2 possible results, either getting a tails or getting a heads, that theoretically half the time we should get a tails and half the time we should get a heads. Therefore, the theoretical probability of flipping a tails is 1 out of 2. However, if we do an experiment, it does not mean that in actuality half the outcomes will be tails and half of them will be heads. In fact, when flipping 6 times and recording the results, Briley found that she flipped a tails 1, 2, 3, 4 times out of 6. So the probability for her experiment of flipping a tails was 4 out of 6. In fact, it did not match the theoretical probability. For C, you are asked, what is the probability of flipping a tails on the 7th trial? Well, on the 7th trial, you still only have 2 possible outcomes. Every flip is independent of another, which means the outcome that she got up here has nothing to do with the potential outcome on her 7th trial, which means her probability of flipping a tails is still 1 out of 2 possibilities. Next, it says Jalen is buying a new pair of shoes. He needs to choose a brand and a color. He can choose Nikes, Adidas, or Jordans for the brand. For the color, he can choose black, white, or red. When you make a tree diagram, we should see only one tree. I always start with a point and draw branches to represent all the outcomes of the first choice. Since his first choice is brand and he can choose from Nikes, Adidas, or Jordans, he has 3 choices to choose from, so I'm going to draw 3 branches and label 1 Nike, 1 Adidas, and 1 Jordans. He next will make the choice about what color, whether it will be black, white, or red. So black, white, or red. And he can choose black, white, or red for Adidas also, or from Jordans, black, white, or red. The big idea here is you want to make sure you have one tree. If I were to turn this way, you can see it kind of looks like a tree with 3 branches, and then maybe think about these as leaves. If you count the number of leaves on the edge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that represents that there are 9 possible outcomes. Or if up here you multiply the 3 choices he has for brand times the 3 choices he has for color, you would also see that he has 9 possible outcomes. That is very important for Part B, which is going to ask you to list the sample space. If you recall from your vocabulary, a sample space is a list started with brace and ended with a brace that contains a list of all possible outcomes separated by commas. My first outcome is I could have Nikes that are black. I could also have Nikes that are white or Nikes that are red. So it is acceptable to simply use the first letter of each word to write your sample space. Next, Adidas that are black, Adidas that are white, or Adidas that are red. Then Jordans that are black, Jordans that are white, sorry about that. Jordans that are white or Jordans that are red. And we are going to close it with a brace. Please make sure you begin with a brace and end with a brace. Also important is to make sure that you have listed all 9 outcomes. So please count the elements in your sample space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 elements are listed in your sample space. If any are missing, make sure you go back and check to find the missing one and include it. Next, for C, you are asked probability with this tree. What is the probability that he chooses Jordans that are white? Well, out of these 9 options, there is only one option where we're choosing white Jordans. So that would be 1 out of 9 options. Next, what's the probability that he chooses shoes that are black? Well, they could be Nikes that are black, Adidas that are black, or Jordans that are black. So that would give us 3 options of black shoes out of the 9 possible options. And lastly, what's the probability that he chooses Nikes or Adidas? You have 3 choices that are Nikes, 3 choices that are Adidas, so that's 6 choices out of 9. 6 out of 9 choices are either Nike or Adidas. Now moving over here to number 4, it says use the following frequency table and answer the following questions. So it says cause of death, plane crash and car crash, and we also have whether those people that passed away in a car crash or plane crash either were given CPR or they were not given CPR. We also have totals for each category. So there are 54 that were given CPR, 109 that were not given CPR, 28 that passed away in a plane crash, and 135 that passed away in a car crash, for a total of 163. So this 163 is very important. It is what we call the total. And that total is all possible outcomes, which means all of these probabilities should be over your total of 163. All of them over 163. If you give the frequency without the probability, you have not answered the question and you will not receive credit. So please make sure you include your denominator. Next, you need to account for those that did not receive CPR. Notice this says nothing about how they died. So we are going to look in our not given CPR category and go down here to the total. There were 109 victims that were not given CPR. Next, you are asked death by plane crash. Notice it does not say anything about whether these were given CPR or not CPR. So we are going to use the total of those that passed away by plane crash, and that'll be 28. Next, no CPR, probability of no CPR, but death by car. So if they mention both CPR and car, we have to find the intersection of no CPR with those that passed away in a car crash, and that would be 88. So that's 88 out of 163. So we are not going to ask you to complete a table and find probabilities. You will do them separately. That way we can assess, can you interpret a table versus can you create a table. In the next table, it says Mr. Cannon surveyed 85 sophomores at South Central. Please note that that information tells you the total number of sophomores and it should go in the total category in your table. You are also told that 48 sophomores play football. So if we consider here that we've got some students that play baseball and don't play baseball, and some play football and don't play football, 48 sophomores that play football would go in the football total. So 48 would go here. Then if you continue to read, it says 12 of those. That word those is very important. Of those football players, 12 of them also play baseball. Then it says there are 26 students surveyed that do not play either sport. So that would go in the no baseball, no football, 26. So we have now filled in all the information given. Now it is our job to fill in the remaining values by thinking about whether I should add or subtract. If I know a total and I know a component of that total, I should subtract. So I'm going to take this 48 in my calculator, 48 subtract 12, and we get 36. So we fill in 36 here and recognize that 12 plus 36 should equal 48 for our total. I can find another total here. I've got all those that play no baseball but football, and no baseball and no football, so I can total those up. 36 plus 26 is 62, so I'm going to put that down here. And then I have a choice of whether I want to find no football first or baseball first. It really doesn't matter. So I'm going to come over here and take my total of 85 and subtract out 48. That gives me 37. Then I can work backward. If I know this total, I can subtract out the 26 to find the number of students, sophomores, that play baseball but not football. So 37 subtract 26 is 11. At this point, I would add 12 plus 11 to get 23. And now my table is complete. Before I move on, I am going to check my answers. So we can verify them by making sure that 48 plus 37 adds up to our total, and that horizontally my total here for baseball and my total for no baseball also add up to 85. If they don't both add up to 85, we need to check our numbers. Lastly, on the front here, for number 6, it says, out of 422 seniors at South Central, a survey was taken to see where students applied to college. The survey found that 214 applied to ECU and 78 applied to NC State. 52 applied to both schools. The first thing you need to do is draw a big rectangle and then fill in 2 circles. We need the rectangle, so make sure you add the rectangle if you did not already draw it. There are going to be numbers that we're looking for inside the rectangle that are not in the circles. So I'm going to label my first circle ECU because it was mentioned first, and then my other one NC State. We need to be very careful. When we look at this information, it says that 422 seniors at South Central were surveyed. I'm going to put 422 on the outside. This is our total. That means that every number in my diagram when I finish should add up to 422. Please be very careful that with the next statement you pay close attention. It says that 214 applied to ECU. We are not going to put the number 214 in our diagram. We're simply going to make note that these 2 numbers inside the circle should end up adding up to 214. We're also told that 78 applied to NC State. We cannot put 78 here because it does not say NC State only. So we need to take note that 78 applied to NC State. This is going to help us find our answer. It does not go in our Venn diagram. We are then told that 52 applied to both schools. So I'm going to put the 52 where the circles overlap because 52 did apply to both schools. What I next need to make sure that I do is subtract to find those that applied to ECU only. So let me make that clear. This means ECU only. This is why we cannot put 214 here, because of these 214, some of them applied to NC State. So to find those that attended ECU only, I am going to take the 214 that applied to ECU and subtract out those that also applied to NC State. So 214 subtract 52 is 162. Next, I have 78 students that applied to NC State. From that, I'm going to subtract out the 52 that also applied to ECU, telling me that 26 students applied to NC State only. That's what that means, and that's why we do not put these numbers directly into our Venn diagram. Now remember what I said when I began. I said that all the numbers inside this rectangle should add up to 422. So let's check. 162 plus 52 plus 26. Does that add up to 422? It does not. So what does the difference between 422 and 240 represent? It represents that there are some seniors that did not apply to either school. So they would be on the outside. So if I take this 422 and subtract out the 240 that applied to either NC State or ECU, then I get 182 students. That number needs to go inside the rectangle, not inside the circles. We are looking for that when we grade the quiz, the test tomorrow. If we do not see it, you will lose a point. So we need to have, and again here you can double check. Does 182 plus 162 plus 52 plus 26 add up to 422? It does. So this is what your Venn diagram should look like in entirety. In the next video, I'll be going over problems 7 through 12.